The bitter Montana winter winds howled across the frozen plains as Nathaniel Blackwood completed his dawn patrol along the northern boundary. His weathered face, marked by 38 years of harsh seasons and painful memories, betrayed nothing. As his keen eyes surveyed the endless expanse before him, Blackwood Trading Post stood as a lonely outpost in this unforgiving wilderness of 1876, a testament to one man's determination to escape the world that had taken everything from him. Nathaniel's roan stallion Thunder snorted impatiently as they crested the ridge that provided a clear view of the solitary trading post below. Thin wisps of smoke rose from the chimney where Helena Wilkins would be preparing breakfast. The two Dakota men who assisted with the trading post operations would be checking inventory and preparing for any travelers who might venture to this remote location between Fort Kearney and the Black Hills. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Nathaniel had constructed this isolated existence through methodical planning and rigid discipline after walking away from his former life, creating a carefully arranged barrier against the memories that plagued his nights. As a former Army Scout of mixed Lakota and white heritage, Nathaniel existed between two worlds, never fully accepted by either. "Easy, boy," he murmured to Thunder, guiding him down the snow-covered slope. "Let's get back before Eleanor starts hollering." The rising sun cast long shadows across the trading post as Nathaniel approached. The sturdy log structure stood defiant. Against the wilderness, surrounded by smaller outbuildings, corrals, and a smokehouse that provided the necessities for survival in this harsh territory. Nathaniel dismounted with practiced efficiency, his movements fluid despite the old bullet wound in his shoulder that throbbed in the morning cold. "Morning, Mr. Blackwood," called Joseph Running Fox, the younger of his Lakota workers, as he carried supplies to the storehouse. "Daniel says more snow coming from the north might be heavy by nightfall." Nathaniel acknowledged the information with a single nod, never breaking stride. His relationships with those who worked for him were respectful, but deliberately distant. They respected his skill and fairness, perhaps feared his reputation slightly, but none could claim to truly know him. Inside the trading post, the main room was warm and filled with the aroma of coffee and venison stew. Helena Wilkins, a stern widow in her 50s who had managed Nathaniel's household affairs for the past 4 years, barely looked up from the stove as he entered. "You're late. Food's getting cold." This was their morning ritual, her mild scolding and his silence in response. He hung his coat and hat on the hook by the door, placed his Winchester rifle in the rack with methodical precision, and took his seat at the head of the sturdy pine table. The trading post's main room, like every space in Nathaniel's establishment, was meticulously maintained but frozen in time. A small pair of child's moccasins hung by the door, too small for any adult. A collection of carefully carved wooden figures lined the mantel, gathering dust despite Eleanor's diligent cleaning. A sketch hung on the wall. Nathaniel, younger and less severe, standing beside a Lakota woman with gentle eyes and a small girl, about 6 years old, her smile bright and innocent. Eleanor placed a plate before him. 2 strips of venison, fried potatoes and cornbread, arranged in the exact same pattern as every morning for the past 4 years. "Daniel wants to move the horses to the eastern corral before the storm," Nathaniel said, breaking the silence as he poured his coffee. "I'll tell him," Eleanor replied, making a note in the small book she kept in her apron pocket. She managed the trading post operations with the same precision Nathaniel demanded of himself. "Lieutenant Collins rode by yesterday while you were out," she continued, refilling his cup. "Said there was trouble on the western trail. Wagon party got hit about 20 miles south of here." Nathaniel grunted, neither surprised nor particularly concerned. The Montana Territory in 1876 was still wild country. Outlaws, renegade raids, and natural disasters were common hazards for those seeking fortunes or new beginnings in the West. "Not our concern," he replied, returning to his breakfast. Eleanor's mouth tightened into a thin line. "He said there might be survivors, Nathaniel, women and children among them." The only sign that her words had any effect was the slight pause before Nathaniel took his next bite. 4 years ago, such news would have spurred him to immediate action, gathering supplies and riding out to help. 4 years ago, before the raid that took his wife and daughter, Nathaniel Blackwood had been a different man. "The army will handle it," he said flatly, rising from the table. "I'll be checking the Western Ridge. Have Daniel meet me there at noon." He was halfway to the door when the sound of approaching hoofbeats caught his attention. Visitors to the Blackwood trading post weren't unusual. Travelers, army patrols, and native peoples seeking supplies. But something about the urgent rhythm of these hoofbeats set Nathaniel on alert. He moved to the window, his hand instinctively checking the revolver at his hip. Lieutenant James Collins and 2 soldiers were riding hard up the path to the trading post, leading a 4th horse. Slumped in the saddle was a small figure wrapped in a blood-stained blanket. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. Whatever Collins was bringing to his doorstep meant complications, and Nathaniel Blackwood had spent 4 years systematically eliminating complications from his life. "Eleanor, we have company," he said, his voice betraying no emotion. "Prepare the guest room." The housekeeper looked startled. In 4 years, the guest room had been used only for paying travelers, never for unexpected arrivals, brought by army officers. Outside, Lieutenant Collins dismounted, his young face grim as he approached. The 2 soldiers stayed with the 4th horse, helping the small figure to the ground. "Blackwood," Collins nodded in greeting. At 30, the lieutenant was relatively new to the frontier, but had earned Nathaniel's grudging respect for his fair treatment of both settlers and native peoples. "Whatever you're selling, I'm not buying," Nathaniel said, blocking the entrance to his home. Collins sighed, pushing back his hat. "Not selling anything, Nate. Asking for help." Nathaniel's eyes moved to the small figure now walking toward them. Supported by one of the soldiers, a girl, perhaps 9 or 10, with matted dark hair and clothes stained with dirt and dried blood. Her face was vacant, eyes staring ahead without seeming to see. "The wagon train I mentioned," Collins explained. "Outlaws hit them yesterday morning. By the time we found them, this little one was the only survivor. Found her hiding by the river, half frozen." Something cold and unwelcome stirred in Nathaniel's chest as he looked at the girl. Her vacant stare and rigid posture were painfully familiar, the same shock he'd seen in his own reflection 4 years ago. "Take her to the fort," he said, turning away. "Or to River's Bend. The minister's wife takes in strays." Collins stepped closer, lowering his voice. "We tried the fort. The doctor says she hasn't spoken a word, won't eat and barely sleeps. Just stares like that. The minister's wife already has 6 orphans from that Sioux attack last winter." Nathaniel felt a rare crack in his controlled facade. "And what do you expect me to do with her? You've got space, Nate. You've got the means." Collins met his gaze steadily. "And God knows you understand what she's going through better than anyone in the territory." Nathaniel felt an old fury rising in him. "Don't you dare use Running Stream and Little Bird against me. Not for this." At the mention of those names that were never spoken at the Blackwood trading post, Eleanor appeared in the doorway. Her expression softened as she spotted the girl. "Oh, the poor child," she murmured, moving past Nathaniel. "Come inside, little one. We'll get you cleaned up and fed." The girl didn't respond and didn't seem to register Eleanor's presence until the older woman gently took her arm. Then she flinched violently, pulling away with a small animal-like sound of fear. "She's been like that since we found her," one of the soldiers explained. "Doc gave her something to help her sleep last night, but she woke up screaming. Took 2 men to calm her down." Helena knelt slowly before the girl, making no attempt to touch her again. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story. My name is Helena Wilkins, child. This is the Blackwood trading post. You're safe here. For the first time, a flicker of awareness passed through the girl's vacant eyes. She looked at Helena, then at the trading post behind her, and finally at Nathaniel. Something in his stern countenance seemed to register with her. Perhaps she recognized the same grief she carried. "What's her name?" Helena asked the lieutenant. Collins shook his head. "Don't know. Like I said, she hasn't spoken. We found some papers in one of the wagons belonging to a Robert and Sarah Marshall traveling from Pennsylvania with their daughter Rebecca. We're assuming that's her, but can't be certain." "Rebecca," Helena repeated softly. "That's a lovely name." The girl showed no reaction to the name. She simply stood there, swaying slightly with exhaustion, her eyes now fixed on Nathaniel with an unsettling intensity. Nathaniel felt trapped by that gaze. In her eyes, he saw the same emptiness that had consumed him after finding his own family. The same silence that had nearly driven him mad in those first terrible months. "One night," he said abruptly. "She can stay one night. Then you take her to Rivers Bend or send word to the fort that they need to make arrangements." Without waiting for a response, he turned and strode toward the stables, ignoring Eleanor's disapproving look and Collins's knowing sigh. The snow began falling just after midday, light flurries quickly intensifying into heavy sheets that obscured the landscape. Nathaniel worked methodically, helping Daniel secure the animals and equipment before the worst of the storm hit. The physical labor was a welcome distraction from the unwanted thoughts the girl's arrival had stirred. By late afternoon, the storm had enveloped the trading post in a swirling white shroud. Nathaniel finally retreated to the main building, stomping snow from his boots as he entered. The trading post was unusually quiet, with only the crackling of the fire and occasional sounds from the kitchen breaking the silence. "Eleanor?" He called, hanging his coat. "In here," she replied from the kitchen. "Stew's almost ready." Nathaniel found her alone, stirring a large pot on the stove. "Where is she?" he asked, not needing to specify who he meant. Eleanor glanced toward the doorway. "In the sitting room. I gave her a bath and some clean clothes. She's calmer now, but still won't speak or eat." "And the men?" "Joseph and Daniel are in the bunkhouse. I sent enough food for the night. This storm's not letting up any time soon." Nathaniel nodded, moving to the window. The snow was falling so heavily now that he could barely see the outline of the nearest outbuilding. No one would be traveling in this weather, which meant their unexpected guest would remain longer than the one night he had grudgingly offered. "I found something," Eleanor said, breaking into his thoughts. She wiped her hands on her apron and retrieved a small leather-bound book from the shelf. "This was sewn into the lining of her dress. I found it when I was cleaning her clothes." Nathaniel took the book, examining it carefully. It was a journal, the cover worn and stained with what might have been blood. Opening it, he found pages filled with a neat feminine handwriting. "Property of Sarah Marshall," he read aloud. "Journey begun April 18th, 1876, from Pittsburgh to Montana Territory." "It's the mother's diary," Eleanor explained. "I've only read a few pages, but it seems to be a record of their journey west." Nathaniel flipped through the journal, pausing on a page near the middle. "Rebecca celebrated her 9th birthday yesterday," he read. "Robert carved her a little horse from pine wood. She named it Star after the mare she had to leave behind in Pennsylvania. She says she's going to start her own journal when we reach our new home." A soft sound from the doorway made them both look up. The girl, Rebecca, if that was truly her name, stood watching them. She wore one of Nathaniel's daughter's old nightgowns, her damp hair combed but not braided, her eyes fixed on the journal in Nathaniel's hands. "This is yours," he said. "Not a question, but a statement." The girl made no response, but her gaze remained locked on the journal. "Your mother's?" Helena clarified gently. "Would you like to have it?" Rebecca took a tentative step into the kitchen, then stopped, her body tense as if ready to flee. Nathaniel recognized that careful assessment of escape routes. He had lived that way himself after the raid. "Here," he said, holding out the journal. The girl didn't move, eyeing him warily. With a sigh, Nathaniel set the book on the edge of the table, stepping back to give her space. "It's yours. Take it if you want." After a moment's hesitation, Rebecca darted forward, snatching the journal and clutching it tightly to her chest. It was the first purposeful movement Nathaniel had seen from her. "Dinner's ready," Eleanor announced, keeping her voice calm despite the small victory. "Rebecca, will you join us at the table? You must be hungry." The girl retreated to the doorway, still holding the journal protectively. She made no indication that she intended to eat, but she didn't leave either. "Set 3 places," Nathaniel said, surprising himself as much as Eleanor. "She'll eat when she's ready." The meal was a silent affair. Rebecca eventually took a seat at the table, though she merely stared at the food Eleanor placed before her. Nathaniel ate methodically, his mind troubled by unwanted parallels between this child's situation and his own past. Eleanor made several gentle attempts to coax the girl to eat, but Rebecca remained unresponsive, the journal still clutched in her small hands. As the evening wore on, the storm intensified. Wind howled around the trading post, finding every crack and crevice to whistle through. Nathaniel retired to his office, a small room off the main trading area where he kept his accounts and conducted business. The familiar routine of checking ledgers and inventory lists usually provided a comforting order to his days, but tonight he found himself distracted, unable to focus on the columns of numbers. A particularly violent gust of wind rattled the windows, followed by a crash from somewhere in the main room. Nathaniel rose quickly, hand going to the revolver he always kept nearby. Moving silently through the darkened trading post, he found the source of the noise. A shutter had broken loose and now slapped rhythmically against the building. As he secured the errant shutter, movement in the sitting room caught his eye. Rebecca sat huddled in the corner farthest from the windows, her knees drawn up to her chest, eyes wide with terror at each thunderous gust of wind. "It's just the storm," Nathaniel said, his voice rougher than he intended. "The building's solid. Been through worse." The girl didn't acknowledge him, but her body trembled visibly with each crash of wind. Nathaniel hesitated, then crossed the room to build up the fire, adding several large logs to ensure it would burn through the night. "You should be in bed," he said over his shoulder. "Eleanor put you in the guest room." When he turned, he found Rebecca watching him with that same unsettling directness. There was something evaluating in her gaze, as if she were taking his measure. "Fine," he muttered. "Stay here if you want, but you need sleep." He fetched a blanket from the storage chest, approaching her slowly as he might a spooked horse. When he was still several feet away, he tossed the blanket gently in her direction, making sure it landed within her reach, without crowding her space. "It gets cold in the night," he explained awkwardly. Rebecca made no move toward the blanket, her eyes never leaving his face. The wind howled again, and she flinched, pressing herself tighter against the wall. Nathaniel recognized the reaction, not just fear of the storm, but the instinctive search for a defensible position. Back to the wall, eyes on all entrances. It was how he had lived for months after the raid that took his family. With a sigh of resignation, Nathaniel lowered himself to the floor, positioning himself near the fire at an angle where he could see both the main door and the windows, close enough to provide some sense of protection, but far enough not to threaten. "Storm will blow over by morning," he said, more to fill the silence than because he thought she would respond. "Always do. Best thing is to wait them out." The steady rhythm of the fire began to work its quiet magic, bringing a measure of warmth to the room that had nothing to do with temperature. After a time, Nathaniel noticed Rebecca's eyelids growing heavy, though she fought against sleep with stubborn determination. "I'll keep watch," he found himself saying. "No one's coming through that door tonight." Whether it was exhaustion or a fragment of trust beginning to form, Rebecca finally gave in to sleep, slumping against the wall, her hands still clutching her mother's journal. In sleep, her face lost some of its frozen quality, revealing the child beneath the trauma. Nathaniel watched her, memories he had long suppressed rising unbidden. Little Bird had been about Rebecca's age when the raid came. She had loved storms. Unlike this child, had pressed her face to the window to watch lightning dance across the prairie. Running stream would tell her stories about the thunder beings, turning fear into wonder. Outside, the blizzard continued to rage, but within the trading post something shifted imperceptibly. Nathaniel Blackwood, who had spent 4 years ensuring no one depended on him for anything meaningful, remained vigilant through the night, guarding the sleep of a child who had lost everything, just as he once had. Dawn broke over the Blackwood trading post with the crystalline clarity that follows a heavy snowstorm. The world outside lay transformed beneath a pristine blanket of white, the morning sun casting a golden glow across the unblemished landscape. Nathaniel stood on the porch, surveying the damage. A section of the corral fence buried, the path to the spring house completely obscured, drifts nearly 6 feet high against the eastern wall of the trading post. He had dozed intermittently through the night, always keeping one eye on the child huddled in the corner. Sometime before dawn, he had carried the sleeping Rebecca to the guest room, her small body surprisingly light in his arms. She hadn't stirred, exhaustion finally overcoming her vigilance. "Going to be a job digging out," Daniel Walking Bear observed, joining Nathaniel on the porch. The older Dakota man's breath formed clouds in the frigid air. "Haven't seen a storm like this in years," Nathaniel nodded, calculating the work ahead. "Start with a path to the spring house and the bunkhouse. We'll worry about the rest after." Daniel glanced toward the trading post. "The girl's still sleeping. Mrs. Wilkins is sitting with her." A pause, then. "Joseph says the tracks we found yesterday before the storm, they weren't army." Nathaniel turned sharply. "What?" "Boot prints near the West Ridge. Joseph says they were made by Eastern boots, not military issue. 3 men, maybe 4. A cold that had nothing to do with the winter air settled in Nathaniel's gut. Eastern boots meant civilians, perhaps the same outlaws who had attacked the wagon train. If they were tracking the survivors— "Show me," he said, his scout's instincts awakening after years of deliberate dormancy. By mid-morning, Nathaniel had confirmed Daniel's suspicions. Though the snow had covered most evidence, the men had found enough signs under the sheltering branches of pine trees to piece together a disturbing picture. At least 3 riders had been watching the trading post from the ridge, likely observing Lieutenant Collins's arrival with the girl. "They know she's here," Nathaniel muttered, examining a discarded cigar butt, an expensive brand, not the kind soldiers or local trappers typically smoked. "The storm would have driven them to shelter," Daniel reasoned. "Nearest place is Fenwick's old cabin, about 5 miles west." Nathaniel calculated distances and conditions in his head. If they're smart, they'll wait for better weather before moving. The snow's too deep for fast travel right now. "Why track a child?" Joseph asked, his young face troubled. "That's what I aim to find out," Nathaniel replied grimly. When they returned to the trading post, they found Helena in the kitchen, her expression a mixture of concern and quiet triumph. "She ate," she announced when Nathaniel entered, brushing snow from his coat. "Just a few bites of porridge, but it's a start." "Where is she now?" "By the fire in the sitting room. She found the book you were reading to Little Bird." The one with the paper animals. She's been looking at it for the past hour. Nathaniel felt an unwelcome pang at the mention of the book, a collection of folk tales he had once read to his daughter nearly every night. That Eleanor had mentioned Little Bird's name directly, rather than skirting around it, as had become their custom, signaled how much the child's presence was already disrupting the careful boundaries he had established. Any sign she might talk? "Soon?" he asked, hanging his coat. Eleanor shook her head. "Dr. Wilson from the fort says sometimes these trauma silences last days, sometimes years. Some children never speak again," Nathaniel grunted, moving to the window. The snow continued to fall lightly, adding to the already considerable accumulation. No one would be traveling the trail to Riversbend for at least a week, maybe longer, which meant the girl would remain at the trading post, and so might the men who appeared to be tracking her. "We found signs of strangers watching the trading post," he told Eleanor quietly. 3 men, maybe more. They were here before the storm." Eleanor's hand went to her throat, her face paling. "The Outlaws? The ones who attacked the wagon train?" "Possibly, which means she's not safe yet." He nodded toward the sitting room where Rebecca sat unseen. "I need to know what she saw, what she knows that might make these men track her through a blizzard." "She's a child, Nathaniel," Eleanor protested. "A traumatized child who's lost everything. You can't interrogate her like one of your army prisoners." "I don't intend to," he replied, an edge creeping into his voice. "But those men might come back, and I need to know what we're dealing with." In the sitting room, Rebecca sat cross-legged on the floor near the fire, the book of folk tales open on her lap. She wore one of Little Bird's old dresses, slightly too short at the wrists and ankles, but otherwise a reasonable fit. Her hair had been neatly braided, though her face remained pale and drawn, with shadows beneath her eyes that spoke of troubled sleep. She looked up as Nathaniel entered, her body tensing slightly, hands tightening on the book. There was caution in her gaze, but not the paralyzing fear of the previous day. "You like that book?" Nathaniel asked, keeping his voice deliberately casual as he moved to the armchair opposite her. No response, but she didn't retreat either. "My daughter used to make me read it every night," he continued, surprising himself with the personal disclosure. "She liked the story about the fox and the stars best." Rebecca glanced down at the page before her, coincidentally the very story he had mentioned. Her small finger traced the illustration of a red fox sitting beneath a star-filled sky. "Lieutenant, Collins is coming back in a few days," Nathaniel said, watching her closely. "Once the trail's clear, he'll want to ask you about what happened to your family, to help find the men who did it." The girl's finger stilled on the page, her entire body growing rigid. "I know you're scared," he continued, his voice gentler than Eleanor had likely ever heard it. "And I know words might feel trapped inside you right now. I felt that way once too." Rebecca looked up, a flicker of surprise crossing her face. Nathaniel leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "After I lost my family, my wife and daughter, I didn't speak for almost 3 months. It was like the words were frozen somewhere deep inside me. It was the most he had spoken of that time to anyone, even Eleanor. The admission hung in the air between them, a fragile bridge across 2 separate islands of grief. The men who hurt. "Your family," he said carefully. "I think they're looking for you. I think they know you're here." Fear flashed in Rebecca's eyes, her breathing quickening visibly. "I won't let them hurt you," Nathaniel promised, the vehemence in his voice startling them both. "But I need to understand why they're so determined to find you. What did they want from your parents?" Rebecca clutched the book to her chest, her eyes darting toward the window as if expecting to see faces pressed against the glass. "Is there something they were looking for?" Nathaniel pressed gently. "Something valuable your parents were carrying?" For a long moment, the girl remained motionless. Then, with deliberate slowness, She set aside the book of folk tales and reached for her mother's journal, which she had kept close since Helena had returned it to her. Opening it to the back cover, she worked a fingernail under the binding, peeling back a section of the leather to reveal a small compartment. From it, she withdrew a folded document, yellowed with age but carefully preserved. She hesitated, then extended it toward Nathaniel, her expression a mixture of trust and apprehension. Nathaniel accepted the document, unfolding it carefully. It was a land deed, official and detailed, for a substantial property near Silver Creek, complete with water, rights and mineral claims. The deed was made out to Robert Marshall, but what caught Nathaniel's attention was the additional notation, formerly the property of Archibald Holt, reconveyed under court order. Archibald Holt, Nathaniel murmured, a chill running through him. The name was known throughout the territory, a wealthy businessman with interests in mining, cattle, and land speculation. And if rumors were to be believed, connections to several outlaw gangs who conveniently eliminated competitors or obstacles to Holt's expanding empire. Rebecca watched him intently, seeming to gauge his reaction to the document. "Your father took this land from Holt legally?" Nathaniel asked. "Through a court case?" A small nod, nearly imperceptible, but definitely an answer. Nathaniel's mind raced. "And Holt wants it back. Enough to have your parents killed and to send men after you. The only witness." Another nod, this one more definitive. Rebecca's hands twisted in her lap, and for the first time, Nathaniel saw not just fear, but anger in her eyes. A banked fire that reminded him painfully of Little Bird when her sense of justice had been provoked. "You're safe here," he assured her, refolding the deed. "We'll put this somewhere secure, and when Lieutenant Collins returns, we'll show him this evidence." The girl shook her head vigorously, her message clear even without words. The army couldn't, or wouldn't stand against someone as powerful as Archibald Holt. "You don't trust the army to help?" Nathaniel asked, understanding her concern. Rebecca's gaze dropped to her lap, her silence confirmation enough. "Smart girl," he muttered. Corruption was as common as whiskey in frontier outposts. If Holt had connections at the fort, the girl's safety and the valuable deed might be compromised the moment Collins learned of it. Before he could question her further, the sound of approaching horses drew his attention. Moving swiftly to the window, he saw two riders approaching through the snow. Not army men, but civilians bundled against the cold. "Stay here," he instructed Rebecca, who had already shrunk back toward the wall, her momentary openness vanishing beneath a renewed wave of fear. "Eleanor," he called, moving toward the door, "we have visitors." Eleanor emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. "In this weather? Who would take Rebecca to the cellar?" Nathaniel interrupted, his voice low and urgent. "Use the hidden entrance behind the pantry. Stay there until I come for you." Eleanor's eyes widened in understanding. "You think it's them? The men who—" "I don't know, but I'm not taking chances." He reached for his rifle, checking that it was loaded. "Go, now!" As Eleanor whisked Rebecca away, Nathaniel positioned himself on the porch, rifle held casually but ready. Joseph and Daniel, alerted by the approaching riders, emerged from the bunkhouse, each armed and moving to tactically advantageous positions with the silent coordination of men who had worked together for years. The riders approached slowly, their horses struggling through the deep snow. As they drew closer, Nathaniel could make out their features. A broad-shouldered man with a thick beard and expensive Eastern clothes, accompanied by a wiry fellow whose sharp eyes missed nothing as they surveyed the trading post. "Hello, the house!" the bearded man called, raising a gloved hand in greeting. "Mighty glad to see civilization after riding through that hellish storm." "Trading post is open," Nathaniel replied evenly, making no move to invite them closer. "If you're looking for supplies, The man dismounted with the practiced ease of an experienced rider, though his clothes suggested city life rather than the frontier. "Much obliged. Name's Howard Sullivan. This is my associate, Mr. Graves. We were headed to Fort Kearny when the storm hit, had to hole up in an old trapper's cabin. Mighty uncomfortable accommodations." Sullivan's smile was broad and friendly, but it didn't reach his eyes, which continued to assess the trading post and its defenders with calculating precision. "Blackwood," Nathaniel offered minimally. "What sort of supplies do you need?" "Coffee, for starters," Sullivan laughed. "Strong enough to resurrect the dead. Then perhaps some information." Nathaniel's posture remained deliberately casual, though his senses were on high alert. "Information? We're looking for a family that might have passed this way. Name of Marshall," Sullivan explained, brushing snow from his coat. "Traveling with a young daughter. They're distant relations of my wife. And we heard troubling news at the last settlement. Something about outlaw trouble on the trail." The lie was smooth, professional, and Nathaniel had heard too many lies during his scouting days not to recognize it. These men knew exactly what had happened to the Marshall family. They might even have been the ones who ordered the attack. "Army. Patrol came through 2 days ago," Nathaniel said carefully, watching their reactions. "Lieutenant Collins mentioned a wagon train hit south of here. Don't recall the names." Sullivan's expression remained pleasant, but his eyes hardened slightly. "Terrible business. Were there any survivors, by chance? The child, perhaps? My wife would be devastated to learn the poor girl perished out there." "Army didn't mention survivors," Nathaniel lied smoothly. "Said it was a clean sweep, took the bodies to the fort for burial." Sullivan exchanged a quick glance with Graves, so brief another man might have missed it. But Nathaniel had spent years reading the minute, signals between men who were communicating without words. "Tragic," Sullivan said, shaking his head solemnly. "Absolutely tragic. Still, we should pay our respects at the fort. The child would have been heir to a considerable estate, legal matters to attend to, you understand?" "Roads to the fort are still blocked," Nathaniel replied. "Won't be passable for days. You're welcome to wait at River's Bend, settlement about 15 miles east. They've got a proper inn." Sullivan nodded thoughtfully. "We might just do that. But first, that coffee you mentioned, it's bitter cold out here." Nathaniel hesitated, then nodded. Turning these men away now would only confirm their suspicions that he was hiding something, or someone. Better to maintain the pretense, learn what he could about them, and send them on their way with the belief that Rebecca Marshall was dead. "Come inside," he said, stepping back. "Coffee's hot." As the men stomped snow from their boots and entered, the trading post Nathaniel caught Daniel's eye, giving him a nearly imperceptible signal. The Dakota man nodded once, then slipped away toward the back of the property where the cellar entrance lay hidden. He would ensure Helena and Rebecca remained undiscovered while their unwelcome visitors were present. Inside, Sullivan and Graves made a show of warming themselves by the fire, though Nathaniel noted their eyes constantly scanning the room, taking in details and exits with professional thoroughness. "Quite an establishment you have here, Mr. Blackwood," Sullivan remarked, gesturing to the well-stocked trading shelves. "Remote, but prosperous." "Gets by," Nathaniel replied, pouring coffee into tin cups. "Nothing to suggest any hospitality beyond." "The minimum required?" "You run this place alone?" Sullivan asked, accepting the coffee. "Got 2 Dakota men who help with the heavy work. Housekeeper comes in from River's Bend when weather permits." The lie about Eleanor came easily. Better these men believe the trading post held only men capable of defending themselves. Graves spoke for the first time, his voice surprisingly cultured for his rough appearance. "Peaceful out here. Quiet. Good place to disappear from the world." His eyes lingered meaningfully on the sketch of Nathaniel's family hanging on the wall. The implied question hung in the air, a subtle probe into Nathaniel's past. Sullivan shot his companion a warning glance. too direct too soon. Just passing through, you said? Nathaniel redirected, deliberately misunderstanding the implied question. For now, Sullivan smiled, revealing teeth too perfect for the frontier. Though we might have business interests in the region soon. Mining ventures, primarily. Rich country around Silver Creek, they say. The deliberate mention of Silver Creek, the very location specified in the marshal's deed, confirmed Nathaniel's suspicions. These men were connected to Archibald Holt, perhaps directly in his employ. They wanted the deed, and they wanted the only witness to their crime eliminated. Don't know much about Silver Creek, Nathaniel said with calculated indifference. Army, patrol mentioned trouble in that region, Sioux uprising or some such, Sullivan chuckled. Rumors, Mr. Blackwood, merely rumors. The native situation is well in hand, I assure you. Our business associate, Mr. Holt, has excellent relations with the local tribes. And there it was, the confirmation Nathaniel needed, delivered with arrogant confidence. Sullivan clearly believed that dropping Archibald Holt's name would impress or intimidate, revealing how accustomed he was to Holt's influence, opening doors and silencing questions. Holt! Nathaniel repeated, as if trying to place the name. Cattle baron from Helena? Among other interests, Sullivan nodded, pleased that Holt's reputation preceded him. A visionary businessman, Montana's future belongs to men like him. Nathaniel made a non-committal sound, refilling their coffee cups. If you're headed east to Rivers Bend, you'll want to follow the creek. Trail's buried, but the creek bank gives easier passage through the snow. Sullivan smiled thinly at the obvious dismissal. Of course, we've imposed on your hospitality long enough. He set down his cup, glancing once more around the room with those calculating eyes. One last question, if you don't mind. The army patrol you mentioned, did they happen to recover any documents from the marshal wagon? Papers, deeds, legal, in correspondence? Family heirlooms, you understand. Didn't mention any, Nathaniel replied steadily. But they weren't exactly sharing details with a civilian trading post owner. No, I suppose not. Sullivan reached into his coat and withdrew a silver case, extracting a calling card which he placed on the table. If you should hear anything about such documents, or about any survivors, Mr. Holt would be extremely generous to anyone providing information. Very generous indeed. Nathaniel picked up the card, examining it briefly before tucking it into his shirt pocket. I'll keep that in mind. Outside, the men mounted their horses with the same practiced ease that had marked their arrival. Sullivan tipped his hat in a mockery of frontier courtesy. Thank you for the coffee, Mr. Blackwood. Perhaps we'll meet again. Perhaps, Nathaniel agreed neutrally, standing on the porch until the riders disappeared into the swirling snow. Only when they were well beyond sight did he signal to Daniel, who emerged from behind the storehouse with a nod of confirmation. Eleanor and Rebecca remained safely hidden. Joseph approached from where he had been watching the trail. They're headed east, he reported, toward Rivers Bend, like you suggested. For now, Nathaniel replied grimly. They'll circle back once they think we've relaxed our guard. They're looking for the girl, Joseph said quietly. The one Lieutenant Collins brought. Nathaniel nodded, his expression hardening. And they're willing to kill anyone who stands in their way. Inside the trading post, Nathaniel moved directly to the hidden cellar entrance, tapping out a pattern that Eleanor would recognize as safe. The concealed door swung open, revealing Eleanor with a shotgun in her hands and Rebecca pressed close behind her. They're gone, Nathaniel assured them, helping Eleanor up the narrow steps. For now. You think they'll be back? Eleanor asked, setting aside the shotgun with the comfortable familiarity of a frontier woman accustomed to handling weapons. I know they will, Nathaniel replied, his gaze moving to Rebecca, who emerged cautiously from the cellar, her eyes questioning. They work for a man named Archibald Holt. They're looking for the deed your father won in court. Rebecca's face paled at the name, her small hands clenching into fists. We need to get her to safety, Eleanor insisted. Take her to Fort Kearney, or even Helena, where the territorial governor could protect her. Nathaniel shook his head. If Holt has the influence I suspect, nowhere in the territory is truly safe. And with the snow, we can't travel far without leaving tracks they could follow. Then what do we do? Eleanor demanded, her protective instinct toward the child evident in every line of her body. Before Nathaniel could answer, Rebecca tugged at his sleeve. The first time she had voluntarily touched him. When he looked down, she gestured urgently toward the deed he still carried, then toward herself, then made a hiding motion. You want to hide the deed somewhere only you know? He interpreted. She nodded vigorously, then gestured to herself again, and made a clear, definitive slashing motion across her throat. The meaning was unmistakable. Without her, the deed was worthless. To Holt, she was the only living claimant, the only one who could legally inherit the property now that her parents were dead. The deed alone wasn't what Holt's men sought. They needed to eliminate Rebecca as well. Smart girl, Nathaniel murmured for the second time that day, a reluctant admiration in his voice. Very smart. In that moment, as Rebecca stood before him, with fear in her eyes, but determination in her stance, Nathaniel Blackwood made a decision he had been fighting since Lieutenant Collins had brought the traumatized child to his door. He would not, could not, turn away from this girl, not when her situation mirrored so closely what his own daughter might have faced had she survived. We'll hide the deed, he told her, kneeling to meet her eyes directly. And then we'll prepare. Because when Holt's men come back, and they will, we'll be ready for them. For the first time since her arrival, something like hope flickered in Rebecca's eyes. Not just the desperate hope of survival, but the deeper hope that perhaps, in this remote trading post with this stern, damaged man, she had found someone who would truly fight for her. A week passed at the Blackwood trading post, each day establishing a tentative rhythm that none of its inhabitants would have imagined possible before Rebecca's arrival. The heavy snow gradually gave way to a January thaw, unusual for the season, but welcome as it began clearing the trails, connecting the isolated outpost to the wider world. Nathaniel found himself adapting to the girl's presence with surprising ease. Her silence no longer felt oppressive, but rather a form of communication all its own, expressive gestures, pointed looks, and an increasing willingness to physically indicate what she needed. For her part, Rebecca seemed to be absorbing everything about her new environment, with the keen observation of a child who had learned early that survival depended on understanding one's surroundings. The morning sun had just crested the eastern ridge when Nathaniel detected movement on the trail approaching the trading post. He lowered the axe he had been using to split firewood, hand moving instinctively to the revolver at his hip. "Riders coming," Joseph called from the watchtower, a new addition Nathaniel had commissioned after Sullivan and Graves's visit. "Army, patrol, Lieutenant Collins with them." Nathaniel relaxed marginally, though caution remained his constant companion these days. "Tell Eleanor," he instructed, "and make sure Rebecca stays close to the house." Lieutenant Collins rode at the head of a small patrol, 6 soldiers following in neat formation. The young officer's face was grave as he dismounted in the yard. "Blackwood," he greeted, removing his gloves. "We need to talk, privately." Inside the trading post office, Collins declined the offered coffee, pacing instead with barely contained agitation. "There's trouble," he began without preamble. "The bodies from the Marshall wagon train, they've disappeared." Nathaniel frowned. "Disappeared? How does an entire wagon train of bodies disappear?" "That's what I'd like to know," Collins replied grimly. "I sent men to recover them for proper burial after we brought the girl here, but when they arrived, there was nothing. No bodies, minimal blood evidence, wagon debris burned or removed. Someone went to considerable effort to erase what happened there." Nathaniel absorbed this unsettling information. "Covering their tracks?" "Precisely. And there's more." Collins lowered his voice, though they were alone in the office. "I've been making inquiries about the Marshall family. Robert Marshall was a lawyer from Pennsylvania. He was bringing a legal case against Archibald Holt, something about fraudulent land claims and mineral rights." "I know," Nathaniel said quietly. "Rebecca showed me the deed." Collins's eyebrows rose. "She's communicating with you. That's progress." "Not with words," Nathaniel clarified, "but yes, in her way." He hesitated, then made a calculated decision to trust the lieutenant. "We've had visitors. 2 men claiming to be relatives searching for survivors. They work for Holt," Collins swore under his breath. "Did they see the girl?" "No, we kept her hidden. But they'll be back. They know she's alive, and they know she's here." The lieutenant ran a hand through his hair, a gesture that aged him beyond his years. "It's worse than I thought. There's talk at the fort that Holt has the commanding officer in his pocket. Captain Mercer has been unusually interested in the Marshall case, asking detailed questions about survivors and recovered documents." Nathaniel's jaw tightened. As he had suspected, the army could not be relied upon for protection. "When?" he asked simply. Collins understood immediately. "Days, maybe less. I delayed reporting back as long as I could, but Mercer's sending another patrol specifically to investigate the situation at Blackwood Trading Post." A tense silence filled the room as both men calculated the implications. Finally, Nathaniel spoke. "You're risking your career coming here to warn us." Collins met his gaze steadily. "Some things matter more than a career, Blackwood. That child is the only witness to a massacre orchestrated by one of the most powerful men in the territory. If I stand by and let them silence her, the uniform means nothing." Nathaniel nodded, a newfound respect for the young lieutenant evident in his expression. "What do you suggest?" "Get her out of the territory," Collins said without hesitation. "Take her somewhere beyond Holt's reach. Oregon, maybe, or California, somewhere she can testify safely when the time comes. That's 1,000 miles through winter conditions, with Holt's men likely watching every trail." "Not every trail," Collins corrected meaningfully. "There are paths only a scout with your background would know." Before Nathaniel could respond, the office door opened to reveal Rebecca standing in the threshold, her face pale but determined. She had clearly been listening to their conversation. "Rebecca," Nathaniel began, but stopped when she shook her head firmly. The girl entered the room, closing the door behind her. From the pocket of her dress, one of little birds that Eleanor had altered to fit her, she removed a folded paper. Not the deed, which remained hidden in a location known only to her, but a page torn from her mother's journal. She handed it to Nathaniel, pointing insistently at a particular passage. Nathaniel read aloud, "Robert believes Holt's operation extends beyond mere land theft. The documents he obtained in Pittsburgh suggest a conspiracy reaching into the territorial government itself. If proven, this could bring down not just Holt, but a dozen officials who have enabled his crimes. The evidence is incomplete, but Robert says, with the land deed and the account ledgers, he can prove everything." Collins straightened, suddenly alert. "Account ledgers? What account ledgers?" Rebecca made a writing motion, and Nathaniel provided paper and pencil. Her handwriting was neat but small, labored with concentration as she wrote, "Hidden at our claim. Father buried them before we left to register the deed. Only I know where." "Silver Creek," Nathaniel murmured, the pieces falling into place. "That's why Holt is so desperate. The deed is only part of it. The ledgers could implicate him and his government conspirators in widespread corruption." Rebecca nodded vigorously. Relieved to be understood, she wrote again, "Need to get ledgers before Holt does." Collins and Nathaniel exchanged grim looks. "Silver Creek is nearly 100 miles from here," the lieutenant said, "through Blackfoot territory and some of the most rugged country in the territory. And swarming with Holt's men by now," Nathaniel added. They'll be watching the claim, expecting someone to try recovering those ledgers. Rebecca's expression remained resolute. She wrote one more line. Justice for my parents. The simple declaration hung in the air, weighted with the moral clarity only a child could maintain in the face of such overwhelming odds. The room fell silent as the men considered the impossible task before them. Finally, Nathaniel spoke. I know those mountains. If anyone can get to Silver Creek undetected, it's me. He looked at Rebecca. But you'd have to stay here. It's too dangerous. She was already shaking her head, her posture adamant. Another note. Only I know where. They're buried. You need me. She's right, Collins acknowledged reluctantly. Without her, you could search for months and never find the ledgers. Nathaniel felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. Taking Rebecca into such danger contradicted every protective instinct he had developed since her arrival. Yet leaving the evidence that could bring her parents' killers to justice seemed equally wrong. How long until Captain Mercer sends his patrol? He asked Collins. 3 days. 4 at most. Nathaniel's mind worked rapidly, calculating distances, terrain and weather conditions. We could reach Silver Creek in 5 days if we travel light and take the high pass. But getting back would be slower, especially if we're pursued. I can buy you some time, Collins offered. Delay the patrol, mislead them about which direction you've taken. Maybe a week. Not enough, Nathaniel decided, a plan forming. We need a diversion, something to make Holt believe the girl has gone in a completely different direction. A commotion outside interrupted their planning. Joseph's voice carried clearly from the watchtower. Riders coming, not army, 6 men heavily armed. Nathaniel moved to the window, scanning the approaching party with narrowed eyes. Holt's men, he confirmed grimly. Earlier than expected, Collins joined him, his expression hardening. Sullivan is with them, and that's Wallace Reed with the black hat, Holt's personal enforcer. They're not here to talk. Rebecca had gone, very still, her face drained of color, but her eyes burning with a defiant determination. Nathaniel recognized that look. It was the same one he had seen in his own reflection after the raid that took his family. Not fear, but the absolute commitment to survive, to ensure those responsible paid for what they had done. Lieutenant, Nathaniel said quietly, I'm about to ask you to make a difficult choice between your oath and what's right. Collins met his gaze squarely. I think I made that choice when I rode here ahead of Captain Mercer's patrol. Nathaniel nodded once, then turned to Rebecca. Go to Eleanor, tell her to prepare the emergency pack. She'll know what that means. Then get to the cellar and wait. The girl hesitated only briefly before slipping out the side door, moving with the silent efficiency she had developed during her time at the trading post. What's your plan? Collins asked as the riders drew closer, now visible from the main yard. Depends on what they do next, Nathaniel replied, checking his revolver. But I need your word that whatever happens, you'll help the girl reach safety. You have it, Collins promised without hesitation. But Blackwood, these men won't leave witnesses if they find what they came for. Counting on it, Nathaniel said grimly. Outside, Sullivan's voice carried across the yard. Blackwood, come out and talk. We know the Marshall girl is here. Nathaniel and Collins exchanged one final look of understanding before stepping onto the porch to confront the heavily armed party. Daniel and Joseph had taken up defensive positions near the stables, outgunned but determined. That's far enough, Nathaniel called as the riders approached the main building. State your business. Sullivan smiled coldly from horseback. No need for hostilities, Blackwood. We're here on official business. He gestured to a man beside him who wore a tarnished sheriff's badge. Sheriff Donovan has a warrant for the apprehension of a material witness in the Marshall Wagon train attack. Nathaniel's expression remained impassive. Convenient timing. Lieutenant Collins and I were just discussing that very incident. Sullivan's smile faltered slightly at the mention of Collins, whose army uniform clearly hadn't been part of his calculations. The lieutenant stepped forward, authority in every line of his posture. "I'm not familiar with any Sheriff Donovan operating in this jurisdiction," Collins said pointedly, "and as the commanding officer who discovered the martial attack, I've received no notification of any civilian warrants related to the case." The man with the sheriff's badge shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. "Military jurisdiction doesn't supersede civilian authority in territorial matters, Lieutenant. I'm acting on orders from Judge Harmon in Helena." "Judge Harmon," Collins repeated. "Archibald Holt's former business partner. How unusual." A tense silence followed this accusation. Wallace Reed, the enforcer, moved his horse slightly forward, his hand resting casually near his holstered revolver. "We're not here to debate jurisdiction. Lieutenant, we have reason to believe Blackwood is harboring a witness to serious crimes. Hand over the Marshall girl, and we'll be on our way." "There's no girl here," Nathaniel stated flatly. "Lieutenant Collins brought a survivor several days ago, but Army Patrol took her to Fort Kearney yesterday." Sullivan's eyes narrowed. "You expect us to believe that? Believe what you want," Nathaniel shrugged. "But if you intend to search my property without a legitimate warrant, you'll find my hospitality quickly exhausted." Reed laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "Your hospitality means little, Blackwood. We have 6 armed men. You have what? A half-breed scout, 2 Indians, and a soldier boy barely old enough to shave? Step aside, or we'll move you aside." Collins bristled at the insult, but Nathaniel laid a restraining hand on his arm. "You seem awfully determined to find a child who allegedly witnessed an attack your employer had nothing to do with." "Careful, Blackwood," Sullivan warned softly. "Accusations against a man like Archibald Holt have a way of becoming fatal errors." The standoff stretched tautly, neither side willing to back down. Reed's hand inched closer to his revolver while Nathaniel remained deceptively relaxed, though ready to draw at the slightest provocation. It was Collins who broke the impasse, stepping forward with the confidence of his uniform. "Sheriff, if that badge is legitimate, you know assaulting a federal installation is a hanging offense. This trading post operates under Army contract to supply Fort Kearney. Any action against it constitutes an action against the United States government." The false sheriff hesitated, clearly uncertain how far his protection from Holt extended. Sullivan, recognizing the temporary setback, raised a placating hand. "No need for threats, Lieutenant. We're simply following legal procedure." His eyes shifted to Nathaniel. "But this isn't over, Blackwood. The girl can't have gone far in this weather. We'll find her, with or without your cooperation. I suggest you try Fort Kearney," Nathaniel replied evenly, "though I doubt Captain Mercer will appreciate civilians questioning his authority." At the mention of Mercer, Sullivan's expression changed subtly, confirmation that the captain was indeed in Holt's pocket. "We'll do that," he agreed with false cordiality. "Good day, gentlemen." As the riders turned their horses, Reed lingered a moment longer, his cold eyes promising future retribution. Then, with a curt nod to Sullivan, he followed the party back, toward the trail. Only when they had disappeared from sight did Nathaniel release the breath he'd been holding. "They'll be back," he said quietly. "Tonight, probably, with more men." Collins nodded grimly. "They weren't fooled about the girl. They're just regrouping, which gives us a few hours at most." Nathaniel turned to Daniel, who had approached silently from his position near the stables. "Get the horses ready, the mountain gear, snowshoes, everything we need for high country travel." Daniel nodded, understanding immediately. "The Northern Pass?" "Yes, known only to your people and a few scouts. We leave at dusk." As Daniel moved to prepare, Collins followed Nathaniel into the trading post, his expression troubled. "You're taking her into the mountains in January?" "We don't have a choice," Nathaniel replied, gathering supplies with practiced efficiency. Holt's men will watch every main trail. The northern pass is dangerous, but it's the only route they won't expect. Eleanor emerged from the back room, Rebecca close behind her. The housekeeper's face was tight with concern, but her movements were precise as she packed provisions into a small, weatherproof sack. "The emergency supplies are ready," she reported. "Dried meat, hardtack, medical kit. Enough for a week if you're careful." Nathaniel nodded his thanks. "We'll need more, and warm clothes for the girl. The pass gets down to 20 below at night." Rebecca watched this preparation with solemn eyes, then slipped away to the guest room, returning moments later with her mother's journal and a small bundle of personal belongings. She had clearly understood the plan without needing explanation. "Lieutenant," Nathaniel said, lowering his voice, "I need one more favor. A significant one." Collins met his gaze steadily. "Name it. I need you to leave visibly with a child about Rebecca's size. Make it obvious. Let Holt's men see you escorting her toward Fort Kearney." The lieutenant frowned. "A decoy? But where? Would we get—" "Sarah Running Fox," Daniel interrupted, entering with an armful of winter gear. "Joseph's sister. She's 10, about the same size as this one." He nodded toward Rebecca. "She and her mother are visiting from the reservation. They're in the bunkhouse now." Collins considered the strategy. "If Holt's men see me leaving with a child, they might split their forces. Follow me while keeping. Watch here." "Exactly," Nathaniel confirmed. "It divides their attention, creates confusion about which trail to follow, and increases the chance of getting Rebecca safely to Silver Creek," Collins concluded. "It could work, but it puts Sarah Running Fox at risk." "No," Daniel countered firmly. "My people will ensure she reaches the reservation safely. Once there, no white man would dare follow, not with Chief Redhawk's warriors watching the boundaries." Silent communication passed between Collins and Nathaniel, acknowledgement of the danger, acceptance of the necessity. Finally, Collins nodded. "I'll do it. But be aware that once Captain Mercer learns I've acted against his interests, my ability to help you will be severely limited." "We understand the sacrifice," Nathaniel said quietly, "and we won't forget it." As preparations continued throughout the afternoon, Rebecca remained close to Nathaniel, watching his methodical organization with keen attention. When he spread a crude map on the table, tracing the route they would take through the mountains, she studied it intently, committing each landmark to memory. "It won't be easy," Nathaniel told her, not softening the reality of what lay ahead. "The pass is treacherous, even in good weather. We'll be traveling at night when possible, hiding during the day. If Holt's men catch up to us in the mountains, our options will be limited." Rebecca nodded soberly, then wrote a single word on her ever-present notepad. "Ready." As dusk approached, the trading post fell into a tense hush of anticipation. Collins departed with Sarah Running Fox, bundled so thoroughly that only her size was recognizable, making a conspicuous show of heading eastward toward Fort Kearney. Joseph accompanied them, tasked with ensuring his sister's safe return to the reservation once the ruse had served its purpose. Eleanor prepared a final meal, her movements betraying her anxiety despite her composed expression. "Be careful," she told Nathaniel as he checked his weapons one last time. "Both of you." "We will," he promised, accepting the small pack of additional supplies she pressed into his hands. "If we're not back in 3 weeks—" "Don't," she interrupted, firmly. "You'll be back. You've found something to fight for again." Her gaze moved meaningfully to Rebecca, who was conferring with Daniel about the trail conditions ahead. "Don't you dare disappoint that child." Nathaniel absorbed her admonition with a slight nod. "Keep the trading post secure. If Sullivan returns, I know what to do," Eleanor assured him, patting the shotgun resting nearby. "This isn't my first winter on the frontier, Mr. Blackwood." A ghost of a smile touched Nathaniel's lips, the closest he came to open affection. "No, Mrs. Wilkins, it certainly isn't." As full darkness descended, Nathaniel led Rebecca through the back entrance of the trading post, both dressed in layers of buckskin and wool, faces partially obscured by scarves against the biting cold. Daniel waited with 3 horses, 1 for each of them, plus a pack horse carrying essential supplies. "The sky is clear," Daniel observed, looking upward at the brilliant canopy of stars. "Good for navigation, bad for concealment. Stay in the tree line until you reach the high country." Nathaniel nodded, helping Rebecca mount her horse, a sturdy pony chosen specifically for its sure-footedness in mountain terrain. The girl settled into the saddle with surprising comfort, adjusting her posture with the natural instinct of someone raised around horses. "You've ridden before," Nathaniel observed. Rebecca nodded, a flicker of sad remembrance crossing her face before being replaced by determination. She patted the pony's neck with a gentle hand, establishing the connection that would be vital in the difficult journey ahead. "Remember," Daniel said quietly, 3 days to the pass if weather holds, 2 more to Silver Creek. The Blackfoot hunting parties stay lower in winter, but watch for sign nonetheless." "We will," Nathaniel assured him, mounting Thunder with practiced ease. "Keep Eleanor safe." Daniel clasped his arm in the Dakota way. "Until your return, brother." With a final nod of acknowledgement, Nathaniel turned his horse northward, Rebecca close beside him, the pack horse's lead secured to his saddle. They moved silently into the darkness, leaving the golden windows of the trading post behind. Rebecca didn't look back, her gaze fixed firmly on the shadowy trail ahead. In the starlight, Nathaniel caught a glimpse of her profile, chin lifted, shoulders squared, eyes alert. For the first time, he saw not just the traumatized child Lieutenant Collins had brought to his door, but a survivor with her own strength and resilience. As they reached the edge of the clearing, a distant sound caught Nathaniel's attention. Riders, approaching from the east, moving fast despite the dangerous conditions. Holt's men, returning as predicted, likely reinforced and more determined than before. "They're earlier than I expected," Nathaniel murmured, urging their horses deeper into the tree line. "Ride close, stay quiet." Rebecca needed no further instruction, guiding her pony with subtle movements that minimized sound. They melted into the forest shadows as the distant riders grew closer to the trading post behind them. The dangerous journey to Silver Creek had begun, a desperate race against both the elements and the men who would stop at nothing to silence the only witness to their crimes. As they disappeared into the wilderness, Nathaniel felt an unfamiliar emotion stirring beneath his gruff exterior. Hope, fragile but persistent, that perhaps in protecting this child, he might find redemption for having failed to protect his own family. Behind them, the night erupted with shouts as Holt's men descended on the trading post. Ahead lay 100 miles of the most unforgiving terrain the Montana Territory could offer, and somewhere beyond that, if they survived, waited the evidence that could bring justice for Rebecca's murdered family, and perhaps healing for them both. 3 days into their journey, the northern pass loomed before them, a narrow gap between towering peaks, its entrance partially obscured by wind-sculpted snowdrifts. Nathaniel halted at the tree line, studying the terrain with the practiced eye of a veteran scout. Beside him, Rebecca sat quietly on her pony, her small face reddened by cold, but her gaze steady as she surveyed the imposing landscape. "We'll rest here before attempting the pass," Nathaniel decided, dismounting stiffly. The temperature had dropped steadily throughout the day, and now, in the fading afternoon light, he estimated it was well below zero. Too dangerous to cross in failing light, they established a minimal camp beneath a rocky overhang. No fire despite the bitter cold. Holt's men hadn't been spotted since their departure from the trading post, but Nathaniel took no chances. Cold weather survival was preferable to the warmth that might draw unwanted attention. Rebecca helped efficiently, her movements economical as she arranged their bedrolls and prepared a cold meal of pemmican and dried fruit. In the 3 days of travel, she had proven herself a remarkable companion, uncomplaining despite the harsh conditions, alert to potential dangers, and increasingly confident in the wilderness. "You've taken to this life quickly," Nathaniel observed, as they huddled beneath shared blankets, their backs against sun-warmed rock that offered minimal heat. "Most city children would have broken by now." Rebecca shrugged, then reached for her small slate, a more practical communication tool for the journey than paper. She wrote, "Father took me camping, taught me stars, tracking." Nathaniel nodded, understanding the bittersweet memory. "He taught you well." She hesitated, then added, "He said, knowledge keeps you alive when luck runs out." "Wise man," Nathaniel acknowledged, passing her a piece of jerky from their rations. "The pass will test that knowledge tomorrow. It's treacherous in winter, narrow paths, hidden ice, potential avalanche conditions. We'll need to lead the horses through the worst sections." Rebecca absorbed this information without visible concern, then wrote, "How did you find this route?" The question was unexpected, touching on personal history Nathaniel rarely discussed. But in the intimacy of their shared circumstances, the old barriers seemed increasingly irrelevant. "I was Army Scout during the border conflicts," he explained, his breath clouding in the frigid air. "The Dakota showed me this pass, a gesture of trust between Running Stream's people and myself. Few white men know it exists." Rebecca's next question came slowly, her chalk moving hesitantly. "Running Stream was your wife?" Nathaniel nodded, surprised by how little pain accompanied the acknowledgement. "Yes, we married against both our people's wishes, built the trading post as neutral ground where both sides could come in peace." The girl studied him thoughtfully, then wrote, "Little Bird was your daughter?" "Yes." Nathaniel's voice softened imperceptibly. "She was 6 when the raiders came. I was away guiding an army patrol. By the time I returned—" He trailed off, the familiar weight of guilt settling over him. Rebecca placed her small hand on his arm, a gesture of understanding that required no words. In that moment, they were united by shared grief, by the visceral knowledge of what it meant to have your world destroyed in a single day of violence. After a moment she wrote, "Not your fault, like my parents wasn't my fault." The simple statement struck Nathaniel with unexpected force. For 4 years, he had carried the certainty that he had failed his family by not being there when they needed him most. Yet here was this child, carrying the same invisible burden, offering absolution he had never granted himself. Before he could respond, a distant sound cut through the mountain silence, the faint but unmistakable echo of horses picking their way through rocky terrain. Nathaniel was on his feet instantly, hand moving to his rifle. "Someone's following the trail," he whispered, helping Rebecca gather their belongings with swift efficiency. "We need to move, now." They packed quickly, loading the horses with practiced coordination that required no verbal instructions. As Nathaniel helped Rebecca mount, a flash of movement on the ridge above caught his attention, sunlight reflecting off something metallic. "Down!" he commanded, pulling Rebecca from the saddle just as a rifle shot cracked across the valley. The bullet struck a rock inches from where they had been standing, sending stone fragments flying. Rebecca remained utterly silent, even in her fear, pressing herself against the ground, as Nathaniel had taught her during their journey. He maneuvered them behind the larger rocks, calculating angles and distances with the rapid assessment of a combat veteran. "At least 2 shooters on the ridge," he murmured, peering cautiously around their cover. "And others, coming up from below. They've found our trail." The girl's eyes were wide but focused, waiting for instructions rather than succumbing to panic. Nathaniel made a swift decision. "The horses are too exposed. We'll have to proceed on foot through the pass. It's our only chance." He retrieved essential supplies from the saddlebags, ammunition, food, the medical kit, Rebecca's mother's journal, and most importantly, the map to Silver Creek. The rest would have to be abandoned. "When I give the signal, run for that crevice," he instructed, indicating a narrow opening in the rock face about 30 yards away. "Don't stop, don't look back. I'll cover you." Rebecca nodded her understanding, tension visible in every line of her small body, but determination eclipsing fear. "Now!" Nathaniel shouted, rising to fire 3 rapid shots at the ridge position. The covering fire achieved its purpose, forcing the distant shooters to duck for cover as Rebecca sprinted across the exposed ground with surprising speed. Nathaniel followed, moving in a combat crouch, firing twice more to discourage pursuit. They reached the crevice, the beginning of a path that would take them through the northern pass by foot, a route too narrow for horses, but potentially their salvation. As they pressed into the shadowed passage, Rebecca tugged Nathaniel's sleeve, pointing back toward their abandoned horses with obvious concern. "They'll be fine," he assured her, understanding her attachment to the animals. "Horses are valuable. In this territory, Holt's men will capture them, not harm them." The narrow path wound upward through the mountains, forcing them to climb in places where winter had altered the terrain. Rebecca proved surprisingly agile, her slight build an advantage in the confined spaces. They moved as quickly as safety, allowed, aware that each minute increased the distance between themselves and their pursuers, who would need to find an alternate route or attempt to follow their treacherous path. By nightfall, they had reached the highest point of the pass, a small plateau offering momentary respite before the descent toward Silver Creek. The temperature had plummeted with the darkness, and without the horses and their full supplies, the danger of exposure became their most immediate threat. "We'll have to risk a fire," Nathaniel decided, gathering what meager fuel they could find in the barren landscape. Small and sheltered, the cold will kill us faster than Holt's men tonight. As he worked to create a flame using flint and char, cloth, Rebecca huddled nearby, her body shivering uncontrollably despite the layers of clothing. When the tiny fire finally caught, they pressed close to its inadequate warmth, sharing the single blanket Nathaniel had managed to bring. 2 more. "Days to Silver Creek," he said, offering her the last piece of jerky from his pocket. "One to descend from the pass, another to reach your family's claim. Can you make it?" Rebecca nodded firmly, though exhaustion was evident in her pale face. She reached for her slate, but found it had been lost in their hasty escape. Instead, she traced letters in the thin layer of snow beside them, ledgers worth it. Nathaniel added a carefully selected branch to their tiny fire. "Tell me about these ledgers. What makes them so valuable that Holt would kill an entire wagon train? To prevent them from becoming public?" Rebecca considered, then wrote, "Names, dates, payments to judges, officials, army officers. Father called it proof of corruption." "And your father got these ledgers how?" "Partner of Holt. Turned against him. Gave father everything before he died." The pieces were coming together in Nathaniel's mind, a conspiracy that reached into every level of territorial governance, extensive enough to warrant the extreme measures Holt had taken. "And after all that, your father still brought you into the territory?" he asked, unable to keep the judgment from his tone. "Knowing how dangerous Holt was?" Rebecca's response came slowly. "Said truth more important than fear. Said running teaches wrong lesson." Nathaniel absorbed this, recognizing in Robert Marshall's principles the same unyielding sense of justice that had once driven his own actions before grief and disillusionment had hardened him. He wondered what kind of man he might have become if he had adhered to those principles rather than retreating into isolation after his family's deaths. The night deepened around them, their tiny fire providing minimal protection against the mountain cold. They took turns sleeping, one always remaining alert for either pursuers or changing weather. During his watch, Nathaniel studied the sleeping child beside him, her face peaceful in repose despite all she had endured, her small hand still clutching the cloth pouch containing her mother's journal. By dawn, they were moving again, descending the eastern side of the pass, where the terrain gradually became less severe. Though exhausted and hungry, they maintained a steady pace, driven by the knowledge that Holt's men would find alternative routes to intercept them. "Look," Nathaniel said quietly as they rounded a bend in the mountain trail. Below them, the landscape opened into a valley, and in the distance, the silver ribbon of a creek reflected the morning sunlight. "Silver Creek. We're closer than I thought." Rebecca's face brightened with recognition, pointing eagerly toward a particular bend in the creek, where a stand of distinctive pines stood like sentinels. "That's your family's claim?" Nathaniel asked. She nodded emphatically, new energy infusing her tired steps as they continued downward. By mid-afternoon, they had reached the valley floor, moving cautiously now through terrain that offered less natural concealment. Nathaniel's experienced eye detected signs of recent activity: broken branches, disturbed ground, the distant remains of a campfire. "Holt's men have been here," he warned, signaling Rebecca to remain close. "Recently, they're watching the claim." They proceeded with extreme caution, using every available cover, freezing into immobility whenever Nathaniel sensed potential danger. As dusk approached, they reached the edge of the clearing that contained the Marshall claim, a partially constructed cabin, the beginnings of a corral, the abandoned tools of a family's dreams for the future. From their concealed position, Nathaniel counted 3 men patrolling the property, one near the cabin, another by the creek, a third moving between positions. All were armed, all clearly watching for approaching visitors. "Too many to confront directly," Nathaniel whispered. "We'll wait for full darkness." As night fell, Rebecca grew increasingly agitated, tugging Nathaniel's sleeve and pointing urgently toward the stand of pines she had identified earlier. The ledgers were hidden there, her gestures indicated, and any delay increased the risk of discovery. "Patience," he counseled. "One mistake now loses everything." They waited until the moon had set and the guard rotations had become predictable. Nathaniel studied each man's patterns, identifying the brief window when their blind spots aligned. "Now," he finally whispered, "stay low, move exactly as I do." They slipped from their hiding place, 2 shadows among many in the darkness. Rebecca led the way to the pine stand, moving with surprising confidence despite the poor visibility. At the largest tree, she dropped to her knees, feeling around its base with practiced hands. Nathaniel kept watch, knife drawn, as Rebecca located what she sought, a small depression hidden among the tree's roots. Her fingers worked quickly, digging through the frozen earth until they struck something solid. With careful movements, she extracted a metal container, its surface coated with dirt, but otherwise intact. The triumph in her eyes was visible even in the darkness as she clutched the container to her chest. But their success was short-lived. A shout from the direction of the cabin shattered the night silence. "Movement by the pines! Circle around! Run!" Nathaniel ordered, pulling Rebecca to her feet. "Head for the creek bed, go!" They sprinted through the darkness, the sounds of pursuit close behind. A shot rang out, then another, bullets whining overhead or thudding into nearby trees. Rebecca clutched the precious container as they ran, refusing to abandon it despite the danger. They reached the creek, its banks offering minimal cover but their only option. As they splashed through the shallow water, Rebecca suddenly stumbled, a small cry of pain escaping her, the first sound Nathaniel had heard her make since her arrival at the trading post. He turned back, scooping her into his arms without breaking stride. A warm wetness seeped through her clothing, blood from a bullet grazed across her upper arm, not life-threatening, but painful and potentially dangerous in their exposed position. "Hold on," he urged, carrying both Rebecca and the container as he sought escape from the closing net of pursuers. A familiar voice called from the darkness behind them. "That's far enough, Blackwood. There's nowhere to run." Sullivan. And judging by the multiple lanterns now visible among the trees, he had brought significant reinforcements. Nathaniel set Rebecca down carefully behind a fallen log, placing himself between her and the approaching men. "Stay down," he whispered. "No matter what happens." Sullivan emerged from the shadows, flanked by Wallace Reed and 4 other armed men. Their expressions showed the confidence of those who believe victory is assured. "Hand over the girl and whatever she just dug up," Sullivan demanded, "and maybe, just maybe, we let you walk away from this." Nathaniel's laugh was cold in the night air. "We both know that's not how this ends, Sullivan." The enforcer, Reed, stepped forward, his revolver aimed casually at Nathaniel's chest. "Always preferred doing this the hard way," he remarked with disturbing pleasantness. "Holt said to bring back the ledgers. Didn't specify what condition you two should be in." Nathaniel's mind raced, calculating odds and options. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and Rebecca was injured. Yet surrender meant certain death for them both. "Before you start shooting," Nathaniel said conversationally, "you might want to consider what happens to those ledgers if neither of us makes it back to civilization." Sullivan's eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about?" "Insurance," Nathaniel bluffed. "Copies of the most damaging pages, already on their way to a federal marshal in Helena. Kill us, and those pages go public within the week." Uncertainty flickered across Sullivan's face, the hesitation Nathaniel had been counting on. In that moment of distraction, he drew and fired in one fluid motion, striking Sullivan in the shoulder and sending the man staggering backward. Chaos erupted. Rebecca, displaying remarkable presence of mind, hurled a stone toward the lanterns, extinguishing one and creating momentary confusion. Nathaniel fired twice more, forcing their attackers to scatter for cover. "Move!" he ordered Rebecca, pulling her deeper into the creek bed as bullets tore through the space they had occupied seconds before. They ran blindly now, pursuit close behind, the precious container clutched against Rebecca's chest despite her injury. In the confusion and darkness, they separated briefly. Nathaniel heard Rebecca splash through the water to his left while he provided covering fire from the right. Then came a sound that froze his blood. Rebecca's scream, high and terrified, followed by Wallace Reed's triumphant shout, "Got her! I've got the girl!" Nathaniel's world narrowed to a single focal point, Rebecca's terrified scream echoing through the darkness. Cold calculation replaced fear as he moved silently through the shadows, guided by the sound of Reed's voice. "Bring the light over here," the enforcer commanded, "and find Blackwood." 20 yards upstream, a lantern illuminated the scene, Reed gripping Rebecca's injured arm with one hand, his revolver pressed against her temple with the other. The metal container lay at their feet where it had fallen in the struggle. The girl's face was a mask of pain and defiance, her eyes darting frantically in search of Nathaniel. 2 of Holt's men converged on the spot, weapons drawn. Sullivan staggered behind them, one hand pressed to his bleeding shoulder, his face contorted with rage. "Blackwood," he bellowed into the darkness, "show yourself or the girl dies right now." Nathaniel assessed the situation with the detached precision of a veteran scout. 3 armed men, Rebecca as hostage, minimal cover, fading ammunition. The odds were impossible, and yet something had awakened in him during their journey, something he had thought died with Running Stream and Little Bird. The fierce, protective instinct of a father, the unwavering resolve of a man with something worth fighting for. From his concealed position, Nathaniel picked up a stone and threw it downstream, creating a splash that immediately drew the attention of Holt's men. As they turned toward the sound, he emerged from the shadows behind Reed, moving with the silent deadliness that had once made him the army's most valued scout. The knife struck with surgical precision, slicing through Reed's gun arm at the tendon. The enforcer howled in pain and surprise, his weapon discharging harmlessly into the air as his grip failed. In the same fluid motion, Nathaniel pulled Rebecca away, shielding her with his body as he fired twice more, forcing the other men to dive for cover. "Run!" he ordered, pressing his spare revolver into Rebecca's hand. "Head for the ridge line." The girl clutched the container with her injured arm, the revolver steady in her other hand, despite never having fired a weapon before. She hesitated, unwilling to leave Nathaniel behind. "Go," he insisted, firing again as Sullivan's men regrouped. "I'll find you." Something in his voice convinced her. With one last, desperate look, Rebecca disappeared into the darkness, moving swiftly despite her injury. Nathaniel continued firing, creating the impression of multiple shooters to cover her escape. When his ammunition ran low, he retreated strategically, drawing the pursuers away from Rebecca's direction. Reed's enraged shouts followed him, promises of torture and slow death that Nathaniel ignored with cold detachment. The pursuit continued through the night, a deadly game of cat and mouse across unfamiliar terrain. Nathaniel led Holt's men on, a circuitous route, always keeping them just close enough to focus on him rather than searching for Rebecca. By dawn, he had maneuvered them nearly 2 miles from the Silver Creek claim, buying Rebecca precious time to reach safety. As morning light seeped across the landscape, Nathaniel found himself cornered against a rocky outcropping, his ammunition depleted, physical exhaustion beginning to take its toll. Sullivan approached cautiously, flanked by his remaining men, Reed noticeably absent after his injury. "It's over Blackwood," Sullivan called, keeping his distance. "The girl can't have gone far, not injured, not in this wilderness." Nathaniel said nothing, conserving his strength, mind working rapidly for any possible advantage. "I'll make you a final offer," Sullivan continued, his voice strained by pain and frustrated rage. "Tell us where she'd go, and you walk away. Holt doesn't need to know you were involved." "Like you let the marshals walk away?" Nathaniel asked coldly. Sullivan's face hardened. "Business, Blackwood. Nothing personal. But this?" He gestured to his wounded shoulder. "This became personal the moment you opened fire." "Good," Nathaniel replied, "because protecting that child is personal to me." A humorless smile twisted Sullivan's features. "Noble sentiment, pointless, but noble. She'll die out there alone if we don't find her first. Either way, those ledgers will be recovered, and no one will ever know what happened. Do Robert Marshall's crusade for justice." "You're wrong," a new voice declared from behind Sullivan's men. Lieutenant Collins stood at the edge of the clearing, rifle raised, flanked by a dozen armed soldiers in Union blue. Beside him, improbably, was Daniel Walking Bear, his own weapon, trained steadily on Sullivan's back. "Drop your weapons," Collins ordered, his voice carrying the full authority of his uniform. "By order of the United States Army, you're under arrest for the murder of the Marshall family and the attempted murder of federal witnesses." Sullivan's face drained of color. "You have no jurisdiction here, Lieutenant. Captain Mercer is himself under arrest," Collins interrupted, "along with Judge Harmon and 3 other territorial officials named in these documents." He held up several papers, pages torn from the ledgers Rebecca had recovered. Quite detailed accounts of Holt's bribery operation. The U.S. Marshal found them very convincing. Nathaniel stared in confusion. "How did you—" "The girl," Daniel explained, never lowering his weapon. "She found us searching for you at dawn, gave us the papers, told us where to find you." "She spoke?" Nathaniel asked, hope and disbelief mingling in his voice. Daniel's expression softened, slightly. No, but she has other ways of making herself understood. Sullivan and his men, recognizing the futility of resistance, lowered their weapons. As Collins's soldiers moved in to secure them, Nathaniel stepped forward urgently. "Rebecca, where is she? She's injured." "Safe," Collins assured him. "With Eleanor at our camp 1/2 mile east. The wound is minor. She refused treatment until we found you." Relief washed through Nathaniel, followed immediately by concern. "And the ledgers?" "Secure," Collins confirmed. "The originals are being transported to Helena under heavy guard. Those pages I showed were copies, enough to convince the U.S. Marshal to act immediately. Holt was arrested at his estate this morning." As the soldiers led Sullivan and his men away, Daniel approached Nathaniel, offering a water canteen. "The child refused to rest until we promised to find you," he said quietly. "She has your stubbornness." Nathaniel accepted the water gratefully. "How did you find us? The pass should have taken you days to navigate." "We didn't use the pass," Daniel explained. "Eleanor received word from Joseph that Holt's men had left the trading post following your trail. She sent him to the reservation for help. Chief Redhawk provided 20 warriors to escort us through Blackfoot territory, a direct route to Silver Creek. Collins joined them, his young face showing the strain of recent events, but his eyes bright with satisfaction. Holt's entire operation is unraveling. The ledgers detail 5 years of systematic corruption, land theft, bribery, fraud, even agreements with outlaw gangs to eliminate competitors. "And Captain Mercer?" Nathaniel asked. Collins' expression darkened. "Received monthly payments to look the other way. When I confronted him with what I knew, he ordered my arrest. If the U.S. Marshal hadn't arrived when he did," he shook his head, "the army will handle its own justice there." "We should go," Daniel interjected. "The child waits." They traveled eastward, Nathaniel's exhaustion forgotten in his urgency to reach Rebecca. When they crested a small rise, he saw the army encampment below. Tents, horses, a cooking fire, where Helena Wilkins stood stirring a pot with characteristic efficiency despite the unusual surroundings. And beside her, small but unmistakable, sat Rebecca. The girl looked up as they approached, her injured arm properly bandaged, her face pale but alert. When she spotted Nathaniel, she scrambled to her feet, hesitating only briefly before running toward him with unexpected speed. Nathaniel knelt to meet her, catching her as she flung herself against him with complete abandon. Her small arms encircled his neck with fierce strength, her body trembling not with fear but with relief. He held her carefully, mindful of her wound, a knot of emotion tightening his throat. "You're safe," he murmured against her hair. "It's over now, truly over." Rebecca pulled back slightly, her eyes searching his face with the solemn intensity he had come to know so well. Then, with visible effort, she formed words that emerged as a whisper, rusty from disuse, but unmistakable. "You came back." The simple statement, her first spoken words since the wagon train attack, struck Nathaniel with the force of revelation. In those 3 words lay everything: her fear that he, like her parents, would be taken from her, her growing trust despite that fear, her recognition that he had risked everything to protect her. "I promised, didn't I?" he responded, his voice rougher than usual. Rebecca nodded, then added with careful deliberation, "Thank you for fighting." "For me," Eleanor approached, wiping her hands on her apron, her eyes suspiciously bright as she witnessed the exchange. "The stew's ready," she announced. "Both of you need food and rest before we discuss what comes next." The practical statement brought Nathaniel back to immediate concerns. He helped Rebecca to her feet, noticing how she remained close to his side as they walked toward the fire. "The ledgers are secure?" he asked Collins, who had followed at a respectful distance. "Yes, and with them Rebecca's future." "Rebecca's. As the sole heir to her father's estate, she'll inherit not only the Silver Creek claim, but substantial holdings in Pennsylvania. The U.S. Marshal has already appointed a trustee to manage everything until she comes of age. Nathaniel absorbed this information. And Holt's men? Those we've captured will stand trial for the Marshal murders, Collins confirmed. With the evidence from the ledgers and Rebecca's testimony, when she's ready, conviction is virtually certain. They ate in relative silence, Rebecca never straying from Nathaniel's side. Eleanor fussed over them both, scolding Nathaniel for his various minor injuries, while simultaneously expressing fierce pride in his actions. Daniel watched the interaction with quiet understanding, recognizing the formation of a new family unit where before there had been only isolated survivors. As evening approached, Rebecca finally succumbed to exhaustion, falling asleep against Nathaniel's shoulder. He shifted her carefully to a bedroll near the fire, covering her with a blanket before joining Collins at the edge of the camp. "What happens now?" the lieutenant asked quietly. "To her, I mean." Nathaniel gazed thoughtfully at the sleeping child. "She has family in Pennsylvania, I suppose. The trustee will locate them. And if there's no one suitable," Collins pressed, "she trusts you, Blackwood. That's evident to anyone with eyes." Nathaniel remained silent, the possibility both terrifying and compelling. For 4 years, he had structured his life to avoid attachments, to prevent the possibility of further loss. The idea of deliberately opening himself to that vulnerability again seemed impossible. And yet, watching Rebecca sleep, her face peaceful for the first time since her arrival at the trading post, he recognized that it was already too late. Somewhere along their desperate journey, this child had become important to him, in a way he had believed impossible after losing little Bird. "I'm not exactly father material," he said finally. Collins smiled slightly. "I don't know. You faced down Archibald Holt's entire operation to protect her, traveled across mountains in winter. Seems fairly paternal to me. She deserves better than a half-Dakota ex-scout with more enemies than friends. She deserves someone who will fight for her," Collins countered. "Someone who understands her. Lost because he's experienced it himself. Someone who sees her strength, not just her trauma." Before Nathaniel could respond, Eleanor approached, having overheard their conversation. "The girl has made her choice quite clear," she stated matter-of-factly. "She's not likely to change her mind, and attempting to separate you now would only cause further harm." "It's not that simple," Nathaniel began. "It never is," Eleanor interrupted. "Raising a child never is. But some things are meant to be, Mr. Blackwood, whether we plan them or not." The journey back to the trading post took 8 days, traveling at a pace suited to Rebecca's recovery. By the time they reached the familiar clearing, spring's first, tentative signs were emerging from beneath winter's grip, crocuses pushing through melting snow, returning birdsong in the cottonwoods, the creek running full with mountain runoff. Rebecca walked beside Thunder, her hand occasionally reaching up to touch Nathaniel's leg, as if reassuring herself of his continued presence. Her speech had returned gradually during their journey, simple phrases at first, then longer sentences, though she still lapsed into silence when overwhelmed or tired. As the trading post came into view, she stopped, gazing at the sturdy log structure with an unreadable expression. "What is it?" Nathaniel asked, dismounting to stand beside her. Rebecca hesitated, then asked in her still careful voice, "Will I stay here with you?" The question held echoes of their conversation months earlier, when Nathaniel had insisted she would remain. Only one night. How dramatically circumstances had changed since that first encounter. "If that's what you want," he replied cautiously. "What do you want?" she countered, displaying the directness that had become characteristic of her communication. Nathaniel considered the question seriously, recognizing its importance. "I want you to be safe," he began slowly, "to have a home where you can heal, to grow up without fear." He paused, then added with new certainty, "I want you to stay, Rebecca. if you choose to." Her smile, rare and transformative, bloomed across her face. "I choose to." 3 months later, the Blackwood Trading Post hosted an unusual gathering. Lieutenant Collins, recently promoted to captain following the exposure of corruption at Fort Kearney, arrived with official papers. Daniel's family joined them from the reservation, including Joseph and his sister Sarah, whose role in the deception had helped ensure Rebecca's safe journey. Helena prepared a feast of unprecedented proportions. Her customary sternness softened by the significance of the occasion. In the main room, before this assembled company, Rebecca Marshall legally became Rebecca Marshall Blackwood. The adoption papers, signed by Nathaniel with uncharacteristic flourish, formalized what had already become reality. They were family, bound not by blood but by shared survival, mutual respect, and growing affection. That evening, after the guests had departed, Nathaniel found Rebecca sitting on the porch steps, gazing at the stars emerging in the twilight sky. He joined her, comfortable now with the companionable silence that still characterized many of their interactions. "Mrs. Wilkins says my room needs new curtains," Rebecca remarked eventually. "She thinks yellow would be nice." "Does she now?" Nathaniel replied, amusement coloring his voice. Helena's domestic ambitions had expanded considerably with Rebecca's permanent addition to the household. "And Daniel says, I'm ready to learn tracking properly," she continued. "He says I have good eyes for it." "He's right," Nathaniel agreed. "You found signs even I missed on the journey home." Rebecca smiled at the compliment, then grew serious again. "I've been thinking about my parents," she said carefully, "about what they wanted for me." Nathaniel waited, allowing her to gather her thoughts. "Father believed in justice even when it was dangerous," she continued. "Mother believed in building something that would last." She looked up at Nathaniel. "I think they would like that I'm here with you." "I think so too," he replied softly. "They would be proud of your courage." "I know I am." Rebecca leaned against his side, a gesture of trust and affection that still surprised him with its naturalness. "When I couldn't speak," she said, thoughtfully, "I was still thinking all the time, and I thought maybe I'd never talk again because the words were too big for what happened." "And now?" Nathaniel asked. "Now I think some things don't need big words," she replied with simple wisdom, "like home and family." She looked up at him. "Those are small words for big things." Inside the trading post, Helena began lighting the evening lamps, their warm glow spilling through the windows onto the porch. The familiar sounds of Daniel and Joseph closing up the stables carried across the yard. In the distance, a wolf called to its mate, a haunting sound that once would have reminded Nathaniel only of his loneliness. Now, sitting beside this remarkable child who had somehow found her way into his carefully guarded heart, Nathaniel Blackwood recognized the wolf's call for what it truly was, not a lament, but an invitation to rejoin the pack, to accept that life, even with its inevitable risks. And sorrows was meant to be shared. "Small words for big things," he agreed, placing his arm around Rebecca's shoulders as the first stars brightened against the darkening sky. "Like home and family." Rebecca nodded, satisfied with this summary of all they had become to each other. Together, they watched night claim the Montana wilderness, not as isolated survivors of separate tragedies, but as a family forged in the crucible of shared courage, finding in each other the healing neither could have achieved alone. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.